People have started donking more in 3-bet pots. Here's exactly how you counter the new meta. You're playing as button versus hijack in a 3-bet pot as the pre-flop raiser. You c-bet small on the flop and hijack calls. The turn is the 9 of diamonds and they lead out for 20% of the pot. This is a tricky spot to play. Let me teach you what to do. First, you need to understand what your opponent is thinking. People will make this play for a variety of reasons. Some people might feel that this turn gives them a natural advantage, so they will donk with a variety of hands. They could be donking with flushes or random bluffs. Other people might suspect that you fold too often versus this donk. To defend properly, you need to raise very often with very unintuitive hands. As such, these people might beat bluffing, have very few strong hands to back their play up. Understanding what your opponent is trying to do is key in order to play effectively against them. The next thing you have to do is identify if this donk is a theoretical mistake. Obviously, the out-of-position player is not allowed to donk on any random board, and there are only select few boards on which they're allowed to do this. In order to outplay your opponents, you need to understand if the solver is allowed to donk very often on this specific board. On this specific board, our opponent is not allowed to donk. If the turn is instead the queen of clubs, our opponent would be able to donk, albeit at a low-ish frequency. I describe how to find turns on which the solver donks in this video on my other YouTube channel. This second point goes hand in hand with the first one. That is to say, the extent of the theoretical mistake is in large part determined by what your opponent is trying to do. For example, if this is the queen of clubs turn and your opponent is donking with value, this is one very specific type of mistake. If your opponent is known to aggressively overbluff, however, their betting frequency might be way too high, and this is clearly a different type of mistake. How they deviate from the Nash equilibrium determines how you want to respond, so it's very important. The donking meta that I've described is centered around overbluffing. I describe why donking works so well as a bluff in the YouTube video on my main channel. If your opponents are overbluffing, you need to raise very often. Here's exactly how often you should raise. The turn is the 9 of diamonds, and your opponent is known to overbluff when they donk. Clearly, the solver is not allowed to donk because the in-position player has a range advantage. Knowing this, you need to take advantage of the strength of your range by raising very often versus this donk. Here's how often you should raise. The solver basically treats this donk as a check and raises for a small bet very often. Any hand that has any showdown value or good bluffing qualities will raise. 6-5, for example, doesn't have a lot of showdown value, but has very good blockers, and also has the capability of making 2-pair or trips on the river. It's also important to raise these hands for balance. Very clearly, you're interested in raising your hands like King-Queen or Ace-Queen, which have a lot of value. Your opponent will struggle to defend versus this raise, so it also makes sense to raise with hands like King-10 or Ace-10. If you never raise with hands like 6-5, then your calling range will become very transparent. Your opponent would then be able to exploit you on the river by just betting very often. So here's the bottom line. First, understand what your opponent is trying to do. Next, identify the extent of the theoretical mistake. And lastly, if they are over-bluffing in line with this meta, you have to raise very often as we've just seen. If you like this straight to the point, super brief video, all that I ask is that you subscribe to the channel to see more. I'll be posting a lot more videos going forwards, and they're going to get a lot better as I improve as a content creator. Hit subscribe and feel free to watch more.